So throughout the presentation, I'm going to be referring to something maybe that you haven't heard before. It's a term called your digital footprint. And I define this as all the public and permanent interactions that you have online. So your communications, postings, your pictures, your chats. Also, what those interactions say about you when they're taken all together in context. And if we backtrack a little bit, we've all heard about stories where someone didn't get hired for a job because of maybe a scandalous photo on Facebook or an inappropriate posting on Facebook. So we know it's important to monitor how we're appearing online. So today we're not really going to talk about your digital footprint in general across all virtual spaces like websites and chat rooms and that kind of thing. We're going to be talking instead specifically about your digital footprint at Walden. Okay, so we'll talk about what your digital footprint is, why it matters. We'll go through a short activity, and then we'll go into tips for presenting your best self, and there'll be time for some Q&A at the end as well. All right, we'll start off with some scenarios here. In your Walden courses, have you ever judged classmates based on their grammar or spelling mistakes? Have you ever thought too much information and rolled your eyes while reading a classmate's introduction? Have you ever been offended by a classmate's response to your discussion? Now, I'm willing to bet that you have. I'm sure that you're all nodding behind your computer screens because it's only natural. You're reacting to that student's digital footprint. And in these scenarios, that footprint is not a positive one. So the student, in terms of the grammar and spelling mistakes, the student's not proofreading, which makes us think that they're rushed or sloppy. They're divulging too much personal material, which makes us think that they're too casual or informal in the classroom. Or the tone of their posts is abrasive, which makes us think that they are rude people. And we don't want ever to have those impressions directed at us, right? And so those are all impressions based on what the student has typed in the classroom's public spaces. Why is it important to be mindful of your own digital footprint and the effect that you're having on others? You are what you type. The others in your class have only your text responses to form an impression of you. Usually, I know that more and more classes are using video components or picture components. In that case, you would really need to consider how you're appearing on camera, what kind of tone and what kind of appearance you're having on camera. But in the traditional classroom, there's only that text response to form an impression of you, rather than at a brick and mortar university where your classmates get your actions, your speaking voice, they get your appearance to form an overall impression. Also, it's permanent. I don't want to make you paranoid by this fact, but what you type online is stored and archived over time, including what you type in the classroom. So it's there for all to see if anyone wants to extract that content later. Your interactions in the classroom could lead to other opportunities, such as a supportive peer network, a job or research opportunity, or eventually to a faculty member agreeing to serve as your doctoral capstone chair. You might say it's only one course, so it doesn't really matter how I present myself. I'm just going to get this done and move on. But it's important to think beyond that to what the course could facilitate for you. Think of each course as a networking opportunity. And of course, you want to present your best self when networking so that you can have all these options that are at your disposal. At this point, I'd like to do a little activity. So try to reflect back on your course discussions over the past few weeks. If you have a discussion handy, you can even look it over. Consider as you're looking over or reflecting back, what do these posts say about you as a person? Is the impression favorable? We'll take a few minutes to do this activity, and you can use the chat box on the right side of your screen to record your impressions. Okay, I'm going to start talking about some of these that we have. We have some great ones so far. Kelly says, I'm opinionated, and that's not such a bad thing on the discussion board, right? As long as you're presenting it as an academic argument, you want to have evidence to back up what your claim or your opinion is. So, as long as it doesn't get too hostile or too kind of feeling based rather than evidence based, that would be fine. Rhonda says, let's see, I tend to get involved and I overthink them. they are long at times, and I'm sure others are not wanting to read them. So thinking about the length of the post and maybe trying to be more concise so that it's more welcoming to other students in the classroom. They might want to read it more if you're more concise in your posts. Great. And then Jennifer shares an experience she had. I had ranted on one of my discussions. Towards the end, I apologized and said it was a bad day. I received positive feedback and that everyone has a bad day from time to time. That is really kind of a success story, Jennifer, because you had that kind of impulse reaction of ranting, but then you realized that you were doing that, and so you kind of pulled back on it and acknowledged it. And so what we're doing through this presentation is we're trying to avoid that initial ranting, right? We're trying to step back before we even type that and kind of think about how would this appear in the classroom. Avoid taking over the discussion. That is a good point too, Valentine, because if you're monopolizing the conversation, then you're bulldozing over other people and you might be considered someone who is a little aggressive. These are all great reactions, and continue to think about them as we move forward in the presentation. Thank you. All right, so on the next couple of slides, I'm just going to present some strategies for sharing your best self in the Walden classroom. These are some general strategies here. Because typos and misspellings are a surefire way to damage your reputation, I recommend composing a post in Microsoft Word first and using the spell check. It's also a good idea to finalize in Microsoft Word so that you don't accidentally hit submit before you're ready. I know that has happened on the faculty end as I hit submit and then I say, oh no, I meant to write more in there, or I meant to proofread before I did so. Read over your post or email first to ensure that it makes sense. Don't use all caps because all capital letters have the feeling of yelling. And also avoid unconventional fonts that could be distracting for your readers, and they also give the impression that you're inexperienced or not to be taken seriously. So kind of stick with those typical Times New Roman or Arial fonts. If you're comfortable with it, add a a school appropriate photo and bio to your Blackboard profile so you can show a little more of your humanity. That's what I've done here on the right side of the screen. I show a picture of myself. And this gives the impression of being welcoming and friendly. So again, you don't want to put too casual of a photo there, something that you wouldn't want to share with colleagues, but something that's appropriate for the classroom. Okay, the previous tips apply to weekly discussions as well, but on this slide I have some additional tips specifically for the weekly discussions. Try not to wait until the last minute to post, because then you run the risk of having grammar and spelling errors due to the rushing. If you do have a situation where you've posted accidentally and then you've noticed errors afterward, post a revision and ask your instructor to delete the original version. They might be able to do that on their end. Or you could apologize, as Jennifer did in the post as well. In terms of etiquette, make sure that you use your peers or instructors' names when responding. Reply to those people who've responded to your initial post. It could just be a thanks, or if they ask a question, make sure that you answer it. Otherwise, you're not acknowledging that they've taken the time to read and engage with your ideas, and your silence could be seen as disrespectful. So consider yourself in a face-to-face situation. If you just did not respond to someone's question, that would be very strange, right? Consider the classroom that same situation. You want to make sure that you know who's speaking to you so that you can respond in kind. Finally, you want to avoid inflammatory statements, anything that can incite an argument, okay? But don't avoid friendly debate if you disagree with someone. The discussion board's all about debating various positions and making assertions. The key is to word that disagreement in a way that's still friendly. And I do want to point out, if you do download these slides, you can click on the links that I've provided on them. They just provide additional resources for you on the particular points that we're going through. Here's an example of two potential responses to another student's posting. The one on the left has a negative tone. It has typos and it uses abbreviations, and it uses all caps for some words. The one on the right has an opening and a closing using the students' names, and it also presents the disagreement as something that the original writer should consider, an alternative viewpoint, rather than something that's blatantly wrong. So hopefully you can see the difference between these two and how the right one is a little bit softer, friendlier, but it still gets that point across of here's an alternative view that you should take into consideration. Now, the class cafe is, of course, the place where you introduce yourselves to other students and to your faculty member. Sometimes your participation there is a requirement and sometimes it isn't. But either way, if you choose to post an introduction in the class cafe, try not to list every accomplishment in your life or go into a lot of your history. I know that can be tempting to do so, but nobody likes someone who brags a lot or talks a lot about themselves. So listing too many details can have that effect in the classroom. Also, even if it's not a requirement, I recommend responding to your fellow students' introductions so that you can build relationships with them. This is especially important if you tend to see the same students from course to course in your program. You can really build that relationship across time and become friends or study buddies and help each other out. So again, this is just getting into thinking not just in terms of one capsule course, like one moment in time, but thinking about what can this, how I interact in this course, what can that interaction do for me in the future? Here are some specific strategies for using the contact the instructor area. First, you'll need to determine if your question is something that applies just to you or to the entire class. If it applies just to you, you can ask it privately through an email or a phone call if that's available from your instructor. There's no reason in those cases to share with everyone. In your communication with your instructor, remember to be polite, even if you're frustrated, and be clear about what you need. That way, the instructor will take your question seriously and consider you a diligent and respectful student. Don't feel like you need to give the instructor a lot of personal details about your situation, just the basics to understand it. Okay? And again, there's some resources on the side here, including a video on how to email your professor effectively. Okay, here's an example of two types of communication with an instructor. The one on the left has been placed in the Contact the Instructor forum, so it's public in the classroom for everyone to see. This student has an unclear subject that appears to be rather desperate, calling for help in all caps. And the post itself includes a lot of details about medication and doctors that are not really needed to get the question across, okay? Finally, there's a vague question at the end, so it's unclear what the student is actually asking for. What do they need? The question is there anything you can do? Well, do about what? About their personal situation, about something in the course, we're not really sure. The example on the right, on the other hand, is sent to the instructor's personal email because the situation relates to one student only, not the entire class. The subject line is clear, extension for week 3 assignment. The student uses the professor's name and greeting and immediately clarifies which course he's in. It is important to remember that instructors teach many courses, so when you identify yourself, it's helpful to give the course and section number so the instructor can immediately home in on, okay, I know who this individual is. Then the student here clearly states what he's requesting, an extension on a specific assignment. And the student signs off with a thank you in his name. So that one is definitely more respectful and clearer in terms of what the student is asking for and will probably be taken more seriously. Right, at this point, we're actually through our content for the presentation, and I surely will welcome questions. I did want to start us off with one question that I typically get when I give this presentation, and that is, how do we truly learn to be objective about what we post in the classroom? Because when we post it, we're so tied to it on a personal level, it's hard to see it in that objective kind of editor way that we would as another individual. So what I suggest in these cases is writing your post or response a day before it's due so that you can really let it sit on your computer for that day. I know sometimes this isn't really possible because of so many other things going on in your life, but think about how could you make time to write that post ahead of time. Leave it for a day on your computer and then come back to it and look it over with fresh eyes. That time away from the post allows you to get distance from it mentally so that when you come back to it, it doesn't seem so personal. It will seem um, more like you're reading someone else's work. So read it over and think about how would an outsider respond to this. So that's one thing that you can do is let a day go by and then come back and consider what you've written before you post it. And then another tip is to review your course at the end of each term to see how you've presented yourself. This could be a good reflection activity. I know probably at the end of a course you just want to move on. You don't want to go back in and consider your actions in that course, but it can help you improve for the future. So look through your course, look at the discussions. Well, how did I respond to this question? How did I interact with my peers? Was it in a way that was welcoming and friendly, or was it in a way that was terse and a little abrasive? So take notes on what you see in your posts for that term, and take notes and think about what you want to be aware of in your next term or what you want to work towards when you're posting in the next term. Okay, so those are my two tips for how to really be objective as we're looking at our contributions in the classroom. So at this point, feel free to type in any questions that you have. Perhaps it's about a specific situation that's occurring in your classroom right now, or maybe a problem that you face typically when you're writing or responding to others. Okay, we have a couple. Denise, I really appreciate your comment in the chat. I think that there's only so much we can do on our end. It's true that other people interpret uh, what we've written in their own way. And so what we can do is just be mindful of this is how I would react to what I'm writing, kind of approach it in that sensitive way. But there might be times when you think that you've posted something completely neutral, not tapping into any kind of inflammatory reaction, but it gets kind of a negative reaction from your peers. And in that case, we can do is apologize and try to work through it with that individual, but it's not something that maybe we could anticipate in the moment. Okay, and Sean, thank you for your question. When or where is it appropriate to use emoticons or smiley faces in the classroom? Well, I personally love smiley faces in my faculty role because it's a way to indicate when you're joking or indicate friendliness, but not all faculty members have that perspective on it. So what I suggest is you kind of use week one as a gauge of what is acceptable in your current classroom. So how does week one transpire in terms of how the faculty member responds, how your colleagues are responding, what is acceptable in terms of the tone, in terms of the level of conversational or casual language going on there. And if you find that the faculty member uses a smiley face, maybe you can throw it in here and there. I wouldn't go crazy with it. I wouldn't go use it abundantly, but but maybe here and there if you're kind of indicating a joke. When is it appropriate to exchange contacts? Okay, so I think, Solace, that you mean contact information with a colleague, and that's perfectly fine. You can email a colleague in your class independently on the back end rather than posting in the classroom itself for all to see. You could ask them, what is your contact information? How can we get together in the future or collaborate on a project or whatnot? That's great. That's a great idea to have because, again, we're thinking about these are fellow professionals in the classroom with us. We can work together to make greater good in the world beyond our classes, or we can help each other as students as well. So yeah, feel free. You can introduce yourselves in the class cafe, and then maybe from that introduction, you can get an understanding of who do I connect with best, or who has similar interests to me, and then maybe email them privately. Okay, Denise asks, what do you think about reply to all? If you have a statement sent to a group of people, but you want to make a comment privately, is that acceptable? Or should it remain as a group comment? So probably here we're getting more into the professional world outside of academics, because I'm not sure if there would be a situation where you'd all be on an email chain, but maybe you do email each other on the back end in the classroom sometimes. What I would say is, yeah, if it's something that is only appropriate for one person, I'd say that it's fine to reply privately. You want to make sure when you're replying all that it is relevant to everyone and everyone should get that information. Sometimes we get into trouble when we reply all because we don't realize that certain people are on that string, that email string, and we might offend people that we thought are not on that email string. So yeah, it's just be very careful when using reply all, I would say. Okay, Sean asks again. Yes, Sean has a lot of questions. How do you think students should address being critical or critically approach another student's discussion post? Well, again, this is where respectful language comes into play. We saw in that example of not going immediately into you are wrong, I am right, but considering it a complicated or complex issue. And let's look at all the varying perspectives here. I might have a different perspective from you. Here's my perspective, and here's what I'm basing it on from the evidence. So it's important to provide that reason why you're opposing what your colleague has said. So that reason could be something from a research article or other resource that you're reading in the classroom. Not so much on personal experience or personal feelings on an issue, but you want to make sure that you're gathering that evidence to really support where you're coming from as a learner as well. Yeah, and it's important not to shy away from those moments where you disagree with someone, because I think sometimes the tendency is just to say, great posting, I agree, or great posting, um, I found the same thing from the reading. I found that uh, it was helpful in such and such way, or whatever. But it can sometimes be a harder activity to disagree. And so it might show your instructor that you have that intellect and that ability to look at uh, the topic from different angles if you do disagree. But again, just be careful of your language. There are still some comments coming in the chat box, and I really appreciate those, how interactive you have been in the presentation. I think that at this point I will hand it over to Sean. Sean, did you have additional questions, or did you want to wrap up the presentation?
Oh, thank you, Hillary. I do not have any additional questions. I think you've answered them all. The emoticon problem has been solved. Thank you all for attending this presentation, and I will end the presentation in about 5 minutes. Thank you.